Hi class, welcome to today's lecture. We'll be discussing public key primitives as a continuation of our introduction to public key cryptography from last week. As a brief summary, last week I introduced the notion of asymmetric encryption. And before we spend some more time thinking about that, I wanted to spend some time talking about methods of sharing secret keys. So with that, let's get started. As a reminder, homework is due this Friday by 5 p.m. through submission on Blackboard. That link should be available later this evening and at the latest by Thursday morning. So thank you for your patience. So during this lecture, we're going to do an overview of what we exactly mean by public key primitives, and in particular what we mean by key exchange. Then we will spend some time describing the abstract notion of what a trapdoor function is. Next, we will go over the well-known protocol, RSA. And finally, we will discuss the Diffie-Hellman Key Exchange protocol. Overview. So why do we need to be able to exchange public keys? Let's consider a toy example or a toy scenario. We have two protagonists, Alice and Bob. They have never met in person and are speaking over the phone to coordinate a blind date. I'm going to go ahead and add some color to the screen to represent Alice and Bob. So here is a bubble representing Alice, and here's a separate bubble representing Bob. And let's just go ahead and change the color here to red. And they are communicating over these phone lines. And what they want to do is they want to have a method of communicating where they can coordinate the location of their blind date. And they want to make sure that their date location is secret from any eavesdroppers listening in on their phone line. So if we reconsider our example here, it's easy to see how an eavesdropper might attempt to listen in right here to that phone line. And so Alice and Bob, they need some kind of method of communicating that doesn't risk this kind of compromise. So Alice and Bob are the cool kids on campus, and they actually took a class on Introduction to Cryptography. And what they understand is that if they can find a way to generate some shared secret, we'll call it C for now, that is unknown to any adversary, then they can use that shared secret to encrypt their messages. However, up until now, every security notion of using any kind of cryptography operating on a shared secret requires having that secret transferred from one actor to another through a sealed envelope or some other secured medium. If Alice and Bob are going to try and share their secret over the phone, then they need some guarantees that if an eavesdropper takes a transcript of this phone call, that eavesdropper will not be able to generate their secret K. And just to kind of eliminate any confusion, so here I reference the secret key C. Oops. So down here I'm referencing C, And here I'm referencing K. So C is the shared secret you use to encrypt the messages, and K is supposed to be that same shared secret. I just accidentally used different notation. So we could actually, um, to make things simpler, let's just add a note here that we know that C equals K. Oops. So let's just add a text box. We'll move that. C equals K. And we will just move that text box out of the way. So as a reminder, it's just C equals K there. So that's all you need to know. I just accidentally changed the notation there. Now some notes, there are some weaknesses in this. In particular, there are no requirements for integrity. Now, I'd like you all to pause here for a moment and attempt to recall from our previous lectures on what message integrity means. I'll wait for a moment. Great, I hope you've had a chance to consider this. As a reminder, message integrity means that you know exactly who the message came from. However, with this protocol, there's no protection from man-in-the-middle attacks as a result of not having message integrity. Also, the protocol is fully anonymous. There is no way to verify that Alice is actually talking to Bob and that Bob is actually talking to Alice. Similarly, this also introduces the vulnerability, which would allow for a man-in-the-middle attack. So, this is a toy example to kind of help motivate us as to why public key encryption might be useful. So with that, let's go ahead and describe our anonymous key exchange attack game. Similar to our other attack games, this will help us understand and analyze proposed solutions for how secure they may be. So we have our protagonist, Alice, and we have our protagonist, and we have our adversary, A, here, and we have our challenger, C. As a reminder, the adversary is trying to pick up the key from the transcription of the conversation between Alice and Bob. And the challenger's only job is to produce that transcription for the adversary. So here, the challenger runs the protocol and generates K. Now, you'll notice here, we haven't described the protocol yet. What we're saying is let's pretend that there is some protocol that we are claiming provides these security properties that we're looking for. And this protocol generates the secret key K that's going to be used for the remainder of the conversation. What the challenger sends to the adversary is the protocol transcript. The protocol transcript does not include K. So let's write that down. TP not include K, just to kind of remind us of that requirement. The protocol transcript is the messages that Alice and Bob sent one another during this, hypothetical protocol. Then the adversary outputs a K prime. And after reviewing the protocol, so the adversary receives the protocol, it reviews the protocol, and then it outputs a K prime. If K prime equals K, then the adversary wins. So let's think for a moment here about what that means. What we're saying is if the adversary can listen here, so we have Alice here, and we have Bob, and we have Bob over here, and Alice and Bob are, Alice sends Bob a message, and Bob sends Alice some messages, what we're saying is that the adversary is going to, they're going to see what's inside this box, right? They're going to see all of these messages, but they're not going to see the secret K that was generated by all of these messages. And their goal is to try to guess what K is from these messages. If K prime equals K, then the adversary has guessed their secret and then is then able to decrypt all of the messages that come after K. Normally I'd pause here and kind of discuss questions for MB in a few minutes because we're doing this asynchronously. I'll continue forward. So yeah, what are the weaknesses in this notion of security? Well, number one, we're assuming that the adversary will not tamper with this protocol. So if we consider our previous discussion here, we're assuming that the adversary is passive, right? We're assuming that this adversary does not try to modify these messages in any meaningful way. So that's one weakness. We can kind of also consider this, aka passive adversary. A second weakness is that this assumes that the adversary cannot simply guess parts of K, right? There's no uniform random distinguishability requirement. There's no, you can imagine if you have a one-time pad, if you know half the one-time pad, you can decrypt half the message. So this protocol makes no assumptions on the adversary not being able to guess part of the message K. Also, there is no identity verification. And as we discussed earlier, this identity verification is important for message integrity. So that's kind of a challenge around there. And sorry, not message integrity, rather. The identity verification is required to know, so you know exactly who you are communicating with, right? Like if I think I'm texting, one of you in this class, but instead I am texting someone who's not in this class, that breaks security. So we don't get that in this particular notion of security. So with that, this is kind of a hard concept to figure out, right? Like how do we find a way to share a piece of information without ever revealing that piece of information? Well, the cryptographic primitive that is going to allow us to accomplish this is known as a trapdoor function. So trapdoor functions are one-way functions that have a trapdoor that allows someone armed with a secret to reverse an otherwise unreversible function. If you want to think about this in terms of a diagram, if you consider a secret room here, and you've got some people that want to try to access this secret room, and all they can do is they can simply, all they're able to do is they can, send messages into this room, but they can't ever get inside this room to see what's happening. Well, if you've got, a hidden trap door right here that allows someone to enter the room, then if you know about this trapdoor and you have the key to access this trapdoor, then you can go in that room and you can get the messages. So if you think about a one-way function, maps from some initial space x to some new space y. But given a y, you cannot map to an x. But if you had a little trap door, that would allow you to access the mappings from y to x. So that's the idea of a trap. That's kind of the basic idea of what we're going to accomplish with the trapdoor function. These functions are over the, this domain and range, x and y, and they consist of a generator. This is what generates any secrets that you use, an actual one-way function, and an inverter. And the inverter has to actually work for the one-way function. And we'll just make sure we label that. So this right here, so it's a one-way function right here. So from x to y. So let's talk about those. So G is our generator. It's probabilistic, so it's not deterministic. So we get different outputs potentially every time. And it produces a public key and a secret key with uniform randomness. F is a deterministic function. It takes in a public key, the same public key that's generated by the generator, and some value x, and x, little x is from the space x, and it produces an output y. And y is a space in this y. And deterministic, as a reminder, means that every input, if you run this input repeatedly, you get the same results. So for a public key and an x, you always produce the same y. We also have an inverter. The inverter is also a deterministic function, and given a secret key, and this should actually say y. So given a secret key and little y, it outputs a deterministic function x. Let me go and correct that in the slides. So we'll just make that modification. Great. So I is a deterministic function, and it outputs an x given a secret key and a y. This needs to be a mathematically hard problem without the secret key. So all of these functions need to be efficient. If you recall from previous lectures, there was a correctness requirement that we discussed before. And the correctness requirement for this function is that for all public key, secret key pairings, if we invert the output of that public key with x using the corresponding secret key, that output needs to equal x 100% of the time. So earlier we discussed some probabilistic correctness models for previous functions. This function has a deterministic 100% guaranteed correctness requirement. And it's easy to see about why this is 100% of the time, right? If we are inverting a trapdoor function and you try to use this to share a secret, we need to get that secret right 100% of the time. Otherwise, we risk not being able to interpret the messages that we are supposed to be able to interpret. So that's kind of the basic introduction to trapdoor functions. Apologies for this issue around around y over here, but hopefully that's not too confusing. I'll push an update to the slides for class. Trapdoor key exchange. So this is showing an example of how you would use a trapdoor function to actually come up with a protocol to exchange keys. And I'd really encourage you to kind of pause here for a moment and take some time to try to think about how you can use this generator, this function, this inverter to come up with a protocol to exchange these, back and forth messages to share a secret. Hopefully, with the function of the inverter and the generator, you can already arrive there yourself. But I'll offer an example. So we have our lead Alice, and we have Alice's friend Bob. And Bob first generates a public key and a secret key using the generator, using a trapdoor function generator. Then Bob sends the public key to Alice. Alice computes the one-way function on the public key and a secret and outputs the one-way result of that encryption. Then Bob gathers from that the secret S, and S is just X. That's just the secret that was being shared. And now, right, Alice knows X. Alice knows X. And since X is the same as S, both Alice and Bob now have a shared secret. And all the eavesdropper will know is the public key used to encrypt the secret with this trapdoor function and the output of that trapdoor function. So let's talk about the attack game. So right, this is the mechanism for actually using a trapdoor function to escape keys. What's the attack game we're going to play to determine the security of trapdoor functions? Well, we have our adversary, who is computationally bounded, and we have our challenger. The challenger first will generate a public key secret key pair, and then generate y equals the one-way function of that public key and some secret x. Then the challenger sends the protocol transcript, and the protocol transcript is just pk and y. If you recall from our previous discussion, pk and y are literally the transcript from a trapdoor key exchange. So that's all that this pk and y represents right here. Then it's the job of the adversary to guess x, and the adversary outputs x prime. And x prime, they're trying to recreate the value x. So if x prime equals x, then the adversary has determined the secret from the protocol. Therefore, the adversary wins. And to tie this back to our initial example, we had Alice over here. We had, Bob over here. Oh, Bob has a bigger head than Alice, but that is what it is. And, Alice and Bob were exchanging messages. And by listening to the exchange messages that are designed to share a secret, the adversary learned the secret. I mean, imagine if you were passing a note to a friend in class and an eavesdropper picked up that note and was able to figure out the secret, and then you and your friend were communicating a secret code. This adversary in class is knowing everything you're exchanging. So that's bad. So that's the trapdoor key exchange game. So let's talk about some actual implementations of security and an actual use of trapdoor functions. So let's talk about, first, we know how RSA. I love history. I think history as a part of computing is something important. So let's talk a little bit about that. So RSA is named for Rivest, Shamir, and Edelman at MIT. If you study cryptography after this class, you'll see Shamir show up later in this course, and Rivet and Edelman are also important thinkers in the space. Legend has it, they got drunk on wine during Passover at a student's house, and I think it was Rivest couldn't sleep well, and so Rivest stayed up all night not sleeping well and came up with RSA. So brilliant ideas might strike you at unexpected times. So these kind of leisure activities are important for our creativity. Now, allegedly, the British intelligence agencies came up with a similar system a few years ago, but they didn't think it was feasible with the computers at the time. So with that, let's talk about RSA key generation. So the first step is to pick an integer, L. L here is going to be the length of the message. And then pick an odd integer, E. E needs to be greater than 2 and be odd. Then generate a random L-bit prime number P such that the greatest common denominator of E and P minus 1 equals 1. So you can imagine if E equals 9 and P equals, let's say P equals 17 and P minus 1 equals 16, whose factors are 2, 4, 8, 1. Well, 9's factors are 1 and 3. So the greatest common denominator of E and P minus 1 would be 1. So that's kind of what we mean by greatest common denominator. Then generate a random L-bit prime Q such that the greatest common denominator of E, and this is supposed to be, this is supposed to be Q minus 1 equals 1. And P does not equal Q. So similarly, I'm just going to go ahead and make that correction in the slides. Great. Okay. So remember, I'm just going to, this is supposed to be a P. So at this point, we had two numbers. We have P and Q, and P does not equal Q, and the greatest common denominator of E and P is 1, and the greatest common denominator of E and Q is 1. We'll revert. Great, so now Q is corrected there. And N is then calculated as P times Q. So let's start off with an example here. Let's say we have, E equals 15, P equals, 7. That's not going to work. P equals on 11, 13 won't work, 23 will work, right? Because 23 minus 1 is 1 to 11, and 15 is 1 through 5. And let's say Q is 29, and it's, so 29 minus 1 is 28, and 28 is 127, 1247. So there's no overlap between Q minus 1 and E, and there's no overlap between P minus 1 and E. So then N equals 23 times 29, which is 667. So that's an example of how you might calculate N. And just a reminder that, sorry, let me find my slide again. And just a reminder that L over here, L is just the length in bits of the prime. So if you think about that, right? If L equals 5, then we're limited to bit, 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 bit. So the biggest number you could have would be 1, 1, 1, 1. So then you have, what is that? That's 1 plus 2, so 3 plus 4. 3 plus 4 is 7. 4 plus 8, sorry, 7 plus 8 is 15. And then 15 plus 16 is like 31. So the highest number would be like the highest number would be 31. But in practice, L's are like typically like 120 to 256. Then we calculate D. So D is e to the negative 1, so the inverse of e, mod p minus 1 times q minus 1. And then the public key is just n comma e, and the secret key is n comma d. Now, there's this notation we're arriving at now where we have x is in z of n. X is the data that's going to be encrypted by the RSA Trapdoor function. Now, z of n is a number group, and it is the positive natural, it's the natural numbers up until n, and all operations happen mod n. This notation is referencing a number group. This is a little bit of number theory and a little bit of group theory. Don't worry, we're going to spend some time during our next lecture discussing the relevant parts of number theory and group theory. But for our purposes right now, all you need to know is that a number group is you can think of it for these purposes as kind of all the numbers up until n that are positive integers, and all the operations happen mod that group, right? So mod means if you do everything mod 5, any number greater than 5, you just subtract 5 until you're less than 5. So if you have 6, 6 mod 5 is 1. Or if you have 13, 13 mod 5 is 3. So I hope that kind of takes this notation right here and reduces some of the mystery behind it. So our function, so our one-way function, says take x and raise it to e mod of zn, and e comes from the public key. So the public key, if you remember, is n comma e. So the public key, is n e. We have e here, and we have n here. So that's the public key being used. And the inversion is the secret key, which is n comma d. And we take the value y, raise it to the d, and n is also being used. Now, take a moment and try to think of the RSA correctness requirement, right? So the RSA, so as a reminder, the correctness requirement says that I of skf of pk of x equals x. So in this case, what it's saying x to the e, which is y, raised to the d should equal x mod n. So as kind of a, right, so this is kind of what the correctness requirement would look like for RSA. So that's the RSA, that's RSA key generation plus the kind of trapdoor function. So this step is the key generation, and this step is the one-way function down here. So normally I would also pause here and wait for questions. Because we're asynchronous, this is all happening remotely. So a couple of reminders, right? GCD is greatest common denominator. P does not equal Q. And L is just the length of the length of the secret in bits. So take some time, maybe watch back this section of lecture a couple of times. These are complicated subjects and are, it's hard to get right your first time. So RSA security, pretty brief. Given n, it's called the RSA modulus, right? So R by modulus would mean that's what you mod everything by. In mod, remember, if you have 6 mod 5, you have 1. If you have 10 mod 5, you have 0. If you have 17 mod 5, you have 2, right? You just subtract 5 from 17 until you get a number that's less than 5. E is the encryption exponent. That's because it's actually used to do the decryption. D is the decryption exponent. So it's actually hard to do the decryption. And y equals x to the e is mathematically hard to calculate x given y. And let's think about that. Why is that true? Why is it hard to calculate? Like, why it doesn't, we're all smart. Why is it hard to calculate that? Well, it's because of this modulus property, right? So if you have, let's say n equals 23, or let's say n equals 10, and x equals 7, and y equals 2. What is E? Well, E could equal 6, right? Because 7 times 6 is 42. 42 mod 10 equals 2. Or x could equal 7 times 12. I think 12 is the next option. Yeah, if not 11, 9. I'm just going to look for something mod 10 that gives me 2. There it is. So, or E could equal 16, right? There's no requirement that E is, so, right, like 7, all right, oh, it's the exponent. So 7, so I'll pick something easier number for me to reason about. Let's pick 3 and say y equals 2. So we have 3 to the 3, nope, 4, nope, 5, nope, 6, nope, 7, 8, 9. So let's say n is 10, x is 3, and y equals 3. Well, what is E? Well, E could equal 1, or E could equal 9, or E could equal 5, right? So like E could be any of these numbers because x to the E mod n equals y. 3 to the 1 mod 10 equals 3 equals y. 3 to the 9 mod 10 equals 3 equals y. 3 to the 5 mod 10 equals y. So I hope this illustrates why this is like mathematically really hard to calculate without, that's called the discrete log hardness is what that is. So that's RSA. I hope that kind of explanation of why this is a hard problem to solve without the correct information. I hope that hardness feels clear to you. Diffie-Hellman Key Exchange. So this is the next big idea in that we're going to discuss. The Diffie-Hellman history, also really interesting. So it earned the authors a Turing Award. The Turing Award is like the most prestigious award in computing. It comes with like $1 million, I think. So you would do well if you earned a Turing Award. Briefly back on this RSA hardness. If you solve this problem, you'll win a Turing Award, and you'll get 10% extra credit too. So double motivation there. So yeah, Diffie-Hellman earned the authors a Turing Award. Authors are Diffie and Hellman. There were 2 Stanford cryptographers, Whitfield Diffie and Martin Hellman. Stanford, MIT, 2 universities that play there. Before this time, there was very little cryptography work outside of the NSA and other intelligence agencies. And actually, one of the head professors that were mentoring Diffie and Hellman told them they were wasting their time. Sometimes the old professors don't know what they're talking about. But people were convinced that these two were wasting their time researching cryptography because the thought was the NSA has all of this money, has all of this resources, has all of this talent. So naturally, they're going to be so much better than everyone else. But it's not always a matter of money. Sometimes you need a little ingenuity and a little bit of luck. The NSA tried to limit their research after they published this public paper. So the NSA literally tried to like silence them for this work. So the NSA has not always been on the side of cryptography. So if you want to stick it to the NSA, if you're feeling anti the NSA, go ahead and read Diffie-Hellman's original paper proposing Diffie-Hellman Key Exchange. The NSA actually went so far as to send letters to journal editors warning that the authors of these kinds of cryptography papers could be sentenced to prison. So these ultimately the NSA was unsuccessful, but there was a moment in time where doing this research was not something that you did unless you really wanted to, unless you really cared about it. So cryptography is a rather antagonistic relationship with the powers that be in the NSA, and not just NSA, right? Other government agencies and other agencies abroad have similar policies. I don't mean to pick on the NSA specifically, but that's kind of what we're dealing with as cryptographers. So take pride in that history. So yeah, let's just go. Let's get in the key exchange. So first, sample two large primes, P and Q, such that Q divides P minus one. So just to give you how hard this is, right? Let's kind of pick some primes that let us do that. So let's say P equals 31 and Q equals 5, right? These are not large at all. But 5 does divide 31 minus 1, 30. So that's kind of what we mean by that property. And the next step is that you do all the math mod P, so you're working in CP. And since Q divides P, there exists a G such that G to the Q equals 1, right? So like 5 to the, 5 to the whatever might equal 1. So this serves as the generator for the group G. Again, this is a little bit of number theory. So we're going to go over the number theory when we have a class that's synchronous and we can ask questions. But don't worry, all you need to worry is that we have this generator G, and it generates this group big G, and the group is just G to the 0, G to the 1, G to the 2, all the way up to Q minus 1. So how does the key exchange work? So we have our A, our Alice, and our Bob. Alice samples an alpha and a U, where U equals G to the alpha, and alpha sampled from ZQ, and U is G to the alpha. So if we go back, the Q and the G being referenced here are this Q right here and this little G right here. So we have the secret U, and then Alice sends that U to Bob. So Alice texts Bob the message U, or says the bit representation of U over the phone to Bob. Bob hears that, and then Bob also generates beta, which is uniformly randomly sampled from ZQ. And then Bob generates V, which is just the generator G to the beta. So U and V are in this group big G, and Alice and Bob generated them, and then Bob sends V back to Alice. Now, if you said, what is beta and what is alpha? Well, that's as hard to solve as it is to solve the discrete log problem. So it's a really hard, you can't really reverse engineer alpha and beta. So then Alice calculates W, which is just V to alpha, and B calculates U, which is U. Bob also calculates W, which is just U raised to the beta. And just to kind of remind ourselves, W equals V to the A. Well, V to the A is just G to the beta to the alpha. U to the beta is just G to the alpha to the beta. So that they're both equivalent to G to the alpha beta. And I just want to make sure I drill that in, right? So um, so V to the A equals G to the B to the A equals G to the B times G to the B times A equals G to the BA, or AB. And U to the beta equals G to the alpha to the beta equals G to the alpha times beta equals G to the AB. So I hope that just a little review of some of the little math things that are helping us out here. Right, Alice and Bob have generated W, their shared secret, right? Bob knows W and Alice knows W. All that the adversary hears over the phone line is U and V. And as we've established, taking the log of U, that is a hard problem. That's a discrete log problem. Taking the log of V is also as hard as a discrete log problem. So in order for an adversary to figure out alpha or beta to derive the secret W, they have to know the discrete log problem. And you can't derive G to the alpha beta given G to the alpha and G to the beta. If you can derive G to the alpha beta from G to the alpha and G to the beta, you will win a Turing Award. It will get 10% more on your homework assignment. So let that sink in. Think about that. Rewatch the section a few times. There's some complicated ideas here, but this is how Diffie-Hellman Key Exchange works. If we compare Diffie-Hellman to RSA, it certainly feels like it's less steps than RSA. It feels that, in my opinion, that feels slightly cleaner, but both are really valid, great tools. So what is Diffie-Hellman security? The security rests on the difficulty of the discrete log problem, and the discrete log problem we described earlier in the lecture in reference to RSA. And if you're kind of curious about how this is true, remember we just reviewed that on this slide. So rewatch that part of the lecture. Also, it's over a cyclic, just to kind of reinforce that, over a cyclic group G, which is the kind of group we're working on, it is mathematically hard to compute alpha given G to the alpha, where G is a generator of big G. Let me just fix that lecture. And finally, this property, just to kind of drill this home, this is further extended, right? So given G to the alpha and G to the beta, where G is a generator, and alpha and beta are uniformly randomly sampled, it is as hard as a discrete log problem to calculate G to the alpha beta. If you can do this bullet right here, you will win a Turing Award and you will, be famous and live throughout history. I don't think it's possible, but that is the hardest problem. A fun little tidbit: if you've ever watched the TV show Silicon Valley, in the final part of the show, one of the main characters, Guilfoyle, says that the AI that the company has created has broken cryptography. And he says they broke it by breaking and cracking a polynomial solution to the discrete log problem. So what that means is that the AI that has done this problem has solved this problem. Like it solved this problem. It calculated alpha given G to the alpha, where G is the generator of group G. And that problem is NP hard. So what Guilfoyle is saying is that by breaking this NP hard problem, the AI is able to break any RSA derived security. And furthermore, if any security rests on any problem that we can translate to discrete log, like the 3-color map problem and things like that, then the security of that protocol is broken. Therefore, all of modern security is broken. Now, that's not entirely true, right? We have security that rests on problems that are harder, and we also have we have different kinds of security. We don't need to worry about this happening. But that's in that scene from the show in the final season. That is when I say this the discrete log problem. This is a discrete log problem that Guilfoyle is talking about amongst a group of friends. So I hope that kind of ties in, the relevance of some of this stuff. So that's the lecture. It might feel short, but that's because we weren't stopping for questions along the way. Please, please, please watch this lecture a couple of times. Please, please, please. Your homework is due Friday. If you haven't started it, get a start on it. You're gonna you need the time to work on it, and you have those floating days that you can use throughout the semester. So you might need to use one of those if you haven't started the homework yet. So just get it started, and have a great evening. Thank you for listening. Thank you. Bye.